So we're back here watching the Survivor Mary Knight documentary again. This is part 3, and we'll get right into it.
They needed a defense back in 1991 when she discovered one. She created it for them. She created the research to back it up, and that's where she is. And she gets paid a ton of money to do it. And no one fact checks anything she says.
Yeah.
And she's very, very good with the media.
Do you ever get mad at her?
Oh, I think I used to, especially after she falsified my case to the media.
Yeah.
Yeah, that shocked me. After you take your case to court and you say all this personal stuff about yourself, you win the case and someone lies about your case to the media. I mean, it's just dumb.
Yeah.
Really, she thought she could do that to me.
Yeah.
And so that's why I filed the ethics complaint. Really, you can't do that.
Dr. Loftus resigned from the American Psychological Association 1 month after Lynn Crook filed an ethics complaint against her.
I mean, you can't.
You can't do that.
You can't lie.
You can't lie.
Yeah.
You tell about a study you did of 105 women in drug treatment that about 50% were sexually abused.
That was a study of women who were in outpatient treatment for substance abuse, and it was being done by a psychiatrist. So I talked her into putting some memory questions into her survey with these women. We asked them to tell us, the status of their memory. Which of these statements is closest to you? I always remembered, even if I didn't talk about it. I remembered parts of the abuse, but maybe not all of it. I forgot for a period of time, and then the memory came back.
And there were like 9% who
It was
forgot.
something like 17 or 18%, depending on whether you count missing data or not, who said, I forgot for a period of time, and then the memory came back. But we don't know what, in the end, we don't know what they meant by that. I'm sure there's plenty of genuine abuse.
Right,
and abuse by priests and people who don't think about it for a long time and then get reminded of it. And
what about Ross Chait? Do you know about, he says that he...
I don't know that he would say he repressed his memory.
Yes.
Dr. Ross Chait lists 110 corroborated recovered memory cases on his website.
I think I had come across this before, but it'd be fun to go through this list at some point and make some content on it. Comment if you'd like that.
His own case is number 26.
Because he seems to have found corroboration, corroboration, but we don't know that he repressed it.
Dr. Ross Chait is an attorney, author, and Brown University professor. He calls his website Recovered Memory Archives.
I think in general, people who were abused as children.
This was basically my original intention behind creating this podcast, is to interview everyone who has had recovery of repressed memories, actually. Yeah, I wanted to interview everyone who's had childhood sexual abuse across different races, genders, perpetrator relationships, and so on. But my own interest is definitely more in the repressed memory stuff.
And either heal from it, or they use that that experience propels them to hurt other people. And with Dr. Loftus, what I think the most reasonable explanation for an intelligent woman ignoring not only the neuroscientific research that's out now, but her own survey study that showed that 18% of child sexual abuse survivors in the study had delayed recall. The explanation I can find is she was affected by her own childhood hurt. And unlike my parents, she doesn't hurt children, but she has made life hell for a lot of survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
Dr. Loftus has testified on behalf of hundreds of accused parents. She was hired as a consultant by Bill Cosby's defense team. Dr. Loftus testified for Ghislaine Maxwell, Harvey Weinstein, Michael Jackson, Ted Bundy.
The Michael Jackson case had come out. Both me and my mom were convinced that he was innocent. And it's pretty fascinating to sit with that. It's like really fascinating to sit with that. And after I recovered my own memories, I had the sense that my mom also experienced abuse like this, and it was repressed for her. And it's like, this is one of the clues. And I hold these senses lightly, like I'm not married to them. But I don't know if you're watching and you have also had a recovery of repressed memories, like, do you have these senses about other humans? Like, what do you do when you have those senses? Have you ever like told someone, and has it gone badly? Has it gone well? I'm so curious to hear. Please leave a comment. Would love to hear.
I'm not interested in Dr. Loftus and her research. I'm a trauma specialist. She's a laboratory specialist who shows people's movies about what they just saw that has no emotional valence. She doesn't inform the work of child abuse, priest abuse, and childhood trauma, because that's not her area of expertise. So, as a scientist, the only people whose work is interesting to me are people who can clarify how people process the memory of extreme experiences. She happens to be not one of them. So you cannot study people being raped in a laboratory because we cannot rape people in a laboratory. So we're really talking about apples and oranges. And it's boring to talk about orange growth when other people talk about apples. A whole group of people studied the British Army after the evacuation of Dunkirk in 1940, and they find that 1/3 of the people block out their memories and are in a daze, and they write it up in medical journals. And that is like, everybody knows that. And then when incest survivors say, this happened to me too, people say, no, it happens to soldiers, but it doesn't happen to you.
Do you think people just don't want to look at something that bad as incest?
Oh, no, it's not that. It's that certain people don't want to look at that. The army didn't want to look at the memory loss in the First World War. And so in 1917, on June 16th, the British General Staff says, you're not allowed to use the word shell shock anymore, because it will undermine the morale of the war and people will no longer want to fight. So if it's not politically convenient, people are not allowed to talk about it. And so it's fine for incest victims to talk about the trauma as long as I'm not the perpetrator of the incest.
In 1991, People magazine did 3 cover stories on recovered memory. By then, you had 24 states had allowed victims to sue based on recovered memories. There were probably thousands of people in the U.S. who were concerned about a defense for these lawsuits. And so Loftus was out there tossing out ideas to the media. Were these sexual fantasies? Daughters were dreaming about, fantasizing about their husbands.
Their fathers.
About their fathers. What were all these things about? Certainly they couldn't be about sexual abuse. So finally she came up with a story. Well, it must be therapists suggesting ideas to their clients. And that became the defense. It first made a headline in August 1991 in the Washington Post. That became their defense. Before then, they had nothing.
No, they're not people who have a real serious stake in the science of what's going on here. They're an advocacy group for people who, for reasons of their own, you figure out what it is, need to deny that incest is real. They have a problem.
I was a speaker at the virtual Global Summit to End Sexual Exploitation. That's how I met fellow speaker and fellow child abuse survivor, Crystal Denise Garcia.
Crystal, it's great to see you. You are such a good pandemic friend.
Oh, yes, I love our friendship, and I can't wait to meet up someday.
Me too. Something you and I have in common is recovered memories of child abuse. Please tell about yours.
Yeah, so the first recovered memory I had was when I was pregnant. I got my recovered memory of child abuse, and I never knew that I had been abused. I had parts of my life that were blacked out, but I thought it was just maybe I was too young to remember it. I realized that it was blacked out because of trauma. And so when I was pregnant, that recovered memory came back. I had no clue that I.
This is something that I've noticed is like one of those clues. Like I remember I had this sense that I had a great childhood, but then I couldn't remember much of it. Like I just did not have many memories, and there was always like an odd sense in me around it. It's like, why do I? Yeah. So if I ask myself what was my childhood like, I was like, oh, it was great. But then there would be like odd moments where I just couldn't remember, and I would be like, oh, how do people remember so much of their childhood? Yeah, but it was one of those things which I just like kind of ignored and don't looked around. I was like, oh, whatever. It's like really hard to compare who remembers how much. It's like how do you and I even compare how much of our childhoods we remember? It's difficult to talk about.
I had suffered that. And when I told the nurse, she said, oh yeah, that's normal. That happens to pregnant women all the time. I recently uncovered another memory, and it was from even earlier in my childhood, and that was very intense. It was very intense. I could barely get through it, and so I went seeking support. I went to a therapist, and I told her what happened. I told her what I was dealing with. I told her what I was trying to work through that was very, very difficult for me. And she said, okay, well, maybe that happened, but who can verify that for you? And I was just really blown away, because I was like, what do you mean maybe it happened? I just told you it happened. And why are you seeking verification outside of me when I'm here in front of you telling you? Why is someone else's voice more valid than mine? So I felt shut down. I felt degraded. And who would I verify that with? Who would I verify my personal experiences that I survived with? And it's not like I would have anyone to ask for verification. And I mean, I was in such a.
Yeah, it's interesting. What a wild question for the therapist to ask. I mean, I can kind of see the point. If I come to someone and I'm like, oh, I just remembered this, and they are not very informed about trauma, they don't have much of a sense of what repressed memories are, they don't know what PTSD is, then I could imagine that would be a reasonable question to ask. It's still such an odd question. And contrast that with my therapist earlier this year, where I had a moment where I shared with her, like, hey, like I'm again in this space of like, was any of this real? Am I just making shit up? And she just told me, she said something like, yeah, I believe this was real. And I asked her, like, why do you believe this was real? And she asked me, because why would you make this up? There's no reason to make it up. It was a really interesting question to receive. Yeah, why would I make it up? But since then, like in my own journey, I have definitely wondered if the perpetrator was someone who ended up not being the perpetrator in the memories that I've recovered. But this person that I did wonder about might have also been a perpetrator, but it is like tricky to tell because I haven't recovered any memories with them. So I do think if like someone wonders if they were sexually abused as a child, it's like just so hard to get to that place of wondering. But I can also imagine, yeah, we live in this like really interesting culture where I think many humans are wanting to, this is a edgy statement to make, but yeah, many humans are wanting to feel like they are victims or something. There's like a lot of victim consciousness around. Yeah. But it's still like just so difficult to get to this place of like, wait, was I sexually abused as a child? That I can't imagine someone getting there and like just making that shit up. But then I'm reminded of like that guy Justin Smollett. I think he's an actor who staged a hate crime against himself for publicity's sake. So we do live in a crazy world.
Dangerous situations as a child, but I ended up in foster care.
I'm so sorry that happened to you. There's actually an organization that recommends counselors do just what your counselor did.
That's horrifying. I don't even understand why an organization like that would exist.
It's called the False Memory Syndrome Foundation.
Wow. Just the name alone is pretty cringy. I mean, that's pretty disturbing. I mean, that sounds like just complete gaslighting, just shutting survivors down. That's disturbing.
It's made up of parents, accused parents, people whose own children consider them rapists.
Wow. And nobody has a problem with this. They don't realize that the people who are being like, who are being said that they are predators are now running an organization to say that they're not.
That's a good point.
That's really alarming.
It was started by the parents of Dr. Jennifer Fried, just a year after she recovered memories of incest by her father.
Dr. Jennifer Fried is a researcher, professor, author, and expert on the psychology of sexual trauma. She wrote a book on betrayal trauma theory, stating that if children are sexually abused by a caregiver, they might forget the abuse in order to maintain the relationship with the person they depend on for survival.
It makes sense.
Humans have a very well-developed attachment system. The attachment system works in both the dependent person and in the caregiver. We've got a reciprocal relationship in the sense that both the caregiver and the infant are giving each other reinforcement for this relationship, and the infant has to do that because this is an extremely resource-expensive relationship for the caregiver. So imagine that baby detecting some mistreatment and trying to respond in the way an empowered person would. That baby's probably risking his or her life because the caregiver might withdraw.
The first interview for this film was in Philadelphia. It was with Dr. Jennifer Fried's mother, Pam Fried. I was so nervous. Meeting the founder of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation was my first step in an on-camera confrontation with the deepest and most vulnerable part of myself.
Hi. Well, something's gotten you questioning, and you really are delving very carefully. I think that's
And I
admirable.
appreciate, oh, thank you.
I just was really surprised. I pick up the phone and call, and I didn't expect to actually, you answer your phone, and then I'm like, can I come? And you're like, that's okay. And I mean, it's the name I've always associated with, False Memory Syndrome Foundation. You and your husband founders, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. When I decided to do the film, Am I Crazy? I decided to really, truly, honestly explore, could my memories not be true? And as you know, I mean, I've had them, it's been 20 or 21 years since I remembered. So, but I wanted to talk to the best people about it. And I thought, yeah, that's you. And then whoever you recommend.
I have another question.
Yes.
Your aunt. Was it
Yes.
your aunt?
My father's sister.
did say some things that sowed some really serious doubts and great concerns.
Yes.
And you wanted to be sure your children were safe.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
I didn't want to break contact unnecessarily, but I didn't want my children to be at risk.
Your aunt seems to have been influential in your life. She seems to have played a really strong role in your beliefs.
No, I mean, I just didn't know her. I just hadn't been around her for, some time. My father's sister hadn't wanted to see him for years, and I didn't know why. And she lived not far from where I lived, and I lived in the Dallas, Texas area. And so my parents came to see me, and they saw my aunt on that same visit. And I said, well, what did she say? Because she hadn't talked to you for years. What's going on? They told me that she thought she was abused. And I said, well, what are you going to do? Well, we just won't see her anymore. And I said, well, you mean you're just never going to see her again? Oh, yeah, she's crazy. We won't see her anymore. They both said that. And then I called my aunt and I said, would you meet with me? And she said, yes, I will. I had the sense it was true. And I didn't have any memories, but I went to a counselor at that point.
So what happened after you recovered these memories?
Well, my first memory was didn't.
One pattern that I've noticed in these conversations that she's having is that and it's so brave of her to do this documentary, but it's like these people that she's talking to from the False Memory Syndrome Foundation seem to be in this like interrogative place, like they're the ones asking all of the questions instead of like, I'd be like interested to ask them like, why did you start this? Why were you certain? And there is a parallel I've noticed on this because the other videos that I've created on my YouTube channel have been this progressive case for Trump. And in conversations that I got into with people who voted for Kamala Harris, and it's edgy to kind of bring politics into this. I understand some of you might be Harris supporters might be like distraught that Trump has been elected, so I apologize for bringing politics into it, but it feels important to share that like I had a similar experience with like friends of mine, community members who were really against Trump, and they would just feel this, like when I would try to have a conversation with them, it would feel like I was on a soapbox and had to like just defend everything that Trump did instead of having like a balanced conversation about both the candidates and like them revealing why they are for the candidate that they are considering, rather than just getting stuck in this like Trump sucks, Trump doesn't suck back and forth. And it felt very like interrogative, and it has a similar flavor to what I'm seeing here. This woman is just like, she clearly, with her questions are like very leading, like at least to me they appear very leading, where she's like trying to collect enough things to then present like a hypothesis, like, oh, clearly your aunt played a role or something like that.
Come under hypnosis. It was a flashback as I was, my counselor had me write down what I do remember, anything I do remember from my childhood, just anything, no matter how benign. And during that period of time, I remembered I had this flash. I had a flash of a man grabbing a dog gruffly. And so then I had my first hypnosis, and under hypnosis, she wanted to go up the sleeve to see who the man was. And that tape is still gut-wrenching for me to hear, because it's just like, I just was sobbing because it was my dad. I called my dad at that point. I called him at work because I thought if I talked to him directly, he would get into counseling too, and then we could both determine what was going on here, and I could still have a relationship with my parents. So I called him, and he said, I have a very good memory, and I know that didn't happen. And he said, I suppose we won't have any contact with you anymore. I said, well, I never said that. It's not my intent of the phone call. I did tell him my children wouldn't be visiting that summer. But I never said that I wouldn't have contact with him. And he said, is this going to lead you to believe that you were sexually abused by me? I said, well, I don't think so. So anyway, that was the change in my relationship with my parents.
And this was all in Texas?
I lived in Texas and they lived in Denver.
What was the year?
I think it was 1992. Tell about when did your organization start?
We started in 1992. There were a bunch of families that got together. We were one of them because our daughter recovered memories, and that was how the foundation started. We were trying to figure out what was going on, and we found other families and we found some professionals.
And now Dr. Underwager, whatever, was he one of the professionals that helped with it?
He was one of the first people we called. He helped, he had taken a phone number so that people could call to request information. This was before the foundation was actually formed.
So did he give you some phone numbers he had or something?
Well, he had been doing that all along. He said he would speak with families. Mm-hmm. So, yes, we had contact with him. When we first formed the foundation, we thought he might be good to be on the advisory board. We had no idea whatsoever about the interviewees had in the Netherlands.
Paideia describes itself as a pro-pedophile publication. In a 1991 interview, Dr. Underwager was asked, "Is choosing pedophilia a responsible choice?" He replied, "Certainly it is responsible. Pedophiles can boldly and courageously affirm what they choose. They can say, I believe this is in fact part of God's will."
That really has nothing to do with recovered memories. That has to do with some opinions on
pedophilia.
And child abuse. Pedophilia.
On pedophilia.
And whether it's child abuse.
But isn't Dr. Wakefield still on your board? Or she was quoted in it too?
She's still on the board.
Well, she was in the interview too. They wrote papers together. They wrote a book together. And she's asked, doesn't your book, Accusations of Child Sexual Abuse, suggest that all sexual relationships between adults and children in the United States are abusive relationships? And she says, no. She said something like that the only way we could know if pedophilia was harmful is to do research with, with children like 9, 10, 11-year-old children, and seeing how a long-term loving relationship, sexual relationship between them and an adult would affect them, if I understood that, right? Did I understand it wrong?
I would have to go and check the years that she's talking about, but she was talking about another country.
Wakefield said, it would be nice if someone could get some kind of big research grant to do a longitudinal study of, let's say, 100 12-year-old boys in relationships with loving pedophiles. This is impossible in the United States right now.
But in terms of the issue of, if somebody's memories are true, that's not a helpful thing. Since you had hypnosis, I would like to give you 2 or 3
I'd be glad
general articles, and then you can read them
Yeah.
And you can make your own decisions in terms of what you think about the reliability.
Most of my memories were not under hypnosis.
At some point, if physical evidence is lacking, if there is no physical evidence for something, at some point, many people want to just step back and say, whoa, I think I need to rethink this.
I think your idea of doing a transcript of my hypnosis tapes is great.
That's the most objective.
I hadn't really thought about that.
Well, I'm happy to speak to anybody who is really searching to find out
that's so good.
What happened. I have another question.
Yes.
If I were to send you or to give you some materials, would you be willing to read them?
Yeah, I'd be glad to read them.
And you're open to reading skeptical things?
I'll read. Absolutely. And I've read a lot, actually. Yeah, and I'll read more. Yeah, I'll read whatever you recommend I read.
Well, thank you for making the trip. Thank you for being open to questioning.
Pam Fry suggested I interview FMSF board member Dr. Lauren Pancras.
I lived in Portland at the time, which is where he lives.
All I'm suggesting is maybe your memories are correct, maybe your memories are wrong. But if they're wrong, it will take you a while to undo them, to begin to unravel them and to say, oh, maybe they weren't quite right. Maybe these were memories that are actually not true. There were things that happened to me in my mind more than that happened to me in my body. So all I'm asking is, keep that idea open.
Yeah, and one thing I did was the whole month of December, I read only literature that was with the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. I could see that I was getting less defensive.
And that's why you're making this movie.
Yeah. But one thing when I was reading that, I wanted to ask you, what I was reading, one thing was saying like a young child who's under age 2 or under age 3 will never remember any abuse, and if they are abused, won't be affected by it. Is that what you think?
A child under 2 really doesn't have memories of anything that happened. Anything that isn't painful, the child, it wouldn't hurt the child. I mean, it may be morally wrong to touch a child who's under 2. It may be obnoxious. It may be, that's a terrible thing to do, and society says no. But if you think about it, it doesn't damage the child. It's wrong, but the child's not damaged by it unless it's physically hurt.
Physically injured or hurt?
Physically injured or hurt.
Well,
unless
what
the
if
child cries?
If the child cries, then would that affect the child later?
So far as we know, children who've been physically abused, anyway abused, they don't remember that, and it doesn't seem to have any later effect on them.
What a ridiculous state of affairs that this guy is like a academic psychologist. Yeah, like what does he mean? It doesn't seem to have any later effect on them. Like it's like trauma is so complex, and the scientific method attempts to find direct causality. Like it really struggles to trace causality if between the event and its effect there are like many layers. And my sense is that this person is constrained by the immediate causality orientation of the scientific method. When he says it doesn't seem to have any later effect on them, what he's saying is that perhaps scientific studies have been unable to establish causality. But there is a very common fallacy that people like this one make, which is that the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. I'll say that again. The absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. So just because you do a study and you're unable to conclusively like prove something because the data is not showing you something, that just means you have not been able to find a causal link, but it doesn't mean you have proved that there is no causal link. And I think that is what is wrong with the statement. It doesn't seem to have any later effect on them. I'm willing to bet the studies are just unable to find the effect, but it's a logical fallacy to go from that to saying it doesn't seem to have any later effect on them.
So that's kind of good news for my sons wanting to find babysitters for their kids, because their kids, their oldest is 2, and so even if their kids are beat up a little bit at the babysitter, it's not going to affect them, and unless there's an injury.
And moreover, we know that most abuse of children under 2, most real sexual abuse that occurs, has to do with touching, usually not penetration. It's usually not very violent. It's not violent at all. It's usually more curious.
Oh my god. What the fuck is this guy saying? Like, I'm actually just hearing him say, like, the way I'm here taking this in is he's just revealing what he has done. Because there is such little data on this that to make a statement like that, he's basically talking up, it's almost like he's saying, I only touched for exploration, I did not penetrate. Like, that's what he's literally saying in my eyes in this moment. I'm curious how you hear it if you're watching this with me.
Curiosity, exploration.
You think a reason someone would fondle a 1-year-old is curiosity?
I think that's usually what people think.
So someone who would want to touch a 1-year-old's vagina, does that for curiosity?
Well, that would be one motivation.
And what would they be curious about? What would an adult be curious about a 1-year? I don't get it.
That's why it's deviant.
Yeah, but you think it wouldn't hurt them?
Stroking the vagina of a 2-year-old child, an unrelated male stroking a child for curiosity, for any other reason.
For sexual reasons, and having an orgasm when the child's there would not affect the child.
That child wouldn't remember that. For example, if a 2-year-old child.
Again, as horrendous as this is to hear, there is just such a basic fallacy in how this human, this psychologist understands trauma, where it seems like in this person's understanding of trauma, memory of the incident is necessary for the impact. So if you don't remember, it can't affect you, and that is just yeah, I mean, that just seems. I mean, that could be one hypothesis for how trauma operates. But yeah, if you looked at that case of people returning from military, being unable to recall memories, but their bodies having intense reactions when there is like firecrackers exploding, like that itself should disprove this person's view on how trauma operates.
Child saw their parents murdered, they wouldn't remember that. That would be a terrible thing to observe for a 2-year-old child, but they wouldn't remember it and therefore wouldn't be affected by it.
Most mental health professionals do not agree with Dr. Pancras. I went to a child abuse conference in Salt Lake City. That's where I met Dr. Susie Wyatt, a well-respected child psychiatrist.
I was told that no matter how much a child under the age of 3 is abused, it won't affect him because he won't remember.
Wow. I have to say I'm aghast hearing that. Do we have specific proof about memory for any of us, even good memory? No, we don't have any specific proof. But again, as a child psychiatrist, and what I have observed clinically, working even with really young kids, is how devastated they are at an emotional level when they have been exposed to any kinds of significant trauma. There's something called non-declarative memory, and non-declarative memory is the memory we don't have words for, but at a deep, rudimentary, guttural level, we have memory. And I would put forth that it's those people who have been so traumatized, have been so emotionally damaged at a young age, who are at the most risk.
I think part of what the concern is if perpetrators hear people say doesn't necessarily hurt the kid, well, obviously there'll be more perpetrators using that as an excuse. So.
Things like that should never happen to anyone. But I've heard some pretty horrific things that humans have done to each other, which again just really saddens my heart. But what I know to be true, and what I've seen so consistently, is when people can start owning those memories, and especially that emotional content around it, and they are finally able to start mastering their emotions around it, that I know that freedom is around the corner for them. And so I guess if there wasn't that freedom, I think it would be really overwhelming, and I don't think I could do the work that I do. But it's that joy in knowing, okay, now they know what's going on.
I love what she said. She's nothing like the counselor who tried to tell me to go find proof.
She doesn't ask her clients for proof. The False Memory Syndrome Foundation recommends suing counselors like her.
Who would sue a counselor who's actually doing their job correctly?
Laura Pasley says her counselor convinced her of memories that weren't true. She sued her counselor and received a settlement.
I read what you had posted on bad therapy. It was when you were 39.
Yes.
Okay, do you mind saying how old you are now?
60.
60, and I'm 58, so we're about the same age.
Laura was 39 when she wrote, "At my first counseling session, Steve," which is what she calls her counselor, "asked if I'd ever been sexually abused. I told him I had, when I was 9. The biggest trauma was that I couldn't tell anyone. I didn't feel comfortable. I was ashamed. So I told that to Steve right up front, but it didn't matter to him because I had always remembered."
I had been sexually molested at a swimming pool.
Yeah.
I told him that.
Yeah.
I said, I remember being abused. It was by a total stranger. And he just totally discounted that. He said, we have to go deeper. That's not it. That's not what's your problem.
So, when you were abused, when you were, by the stranger, age 9, then did you tell your parents about it?
Oh, no.
And so...
No. I didn't tell anybody.
So who was the first person you told?
My daughter's father.
Uh-huh.
I wonder where this instinct comes from. Like, why is there this instinct to not tell anyone? And of course, there are different answers at different levels for this. Like one answer could be shame, but like where does shame come from? Is it the shame of the perpetrator that gets transferred in that moment? You could also think one other answer could be that perpetrators tell kids to stay quiet or threaten them to stay quiet. That could be another answer, but yeah, I just wonder why this happens so often. I'm curious if there's any like research done to explore when kids reveal and when kids don't reveal. I imagine there would be good parenting advice that would come out of it. Yeah, and I've often wondered why I did not say anything. I think something about shock, like it was so shocking for the system that I just didn't have any words to describe what had happened. Yeah, that feels most right in my experience. Like it was just like so shocking that there's something about the experience of shock that is just like creates a freeze, like and then if you have that freeze and you don't even have words to describe it, the act, because no one's spoken to you about sex, then how are you even going to tell anyone? Okay, I think I'm going to pause this here for today. Thanks for tuning in. And I know Mary has another documentary which I've been actually interested. Let's see. This is oh, that's cool. She has a bunch of
Do I click run?
recovered memory. 57. Wow, cool. That'll be fun to fun in this twisted sense of the word, of course. Like I'm grateful that she has done all of this work. Oh yeah, this is the one that I wanted to watch next, Mothers and Molestation, because that is almost like the most taboo aspects of really taboo aspects of childhood sexual abuse, which is mothers molesting. I wonder what this is. Interesting. Yeah, she's cool. I like the work that she's doing. She made a comedy movie. I think we need just more art that looks at this subject a little bit more lightly, I think, so that it can just be loaded more into people's awareness, consciousness. Like not trivially, but lightly. There's like a fine balance to be struck there. Okay, I hope you all have a beautiful day, restful day, and may you be able to release all of the misery that this trauma has brought to your life. All right, take care.